were investigating the fentanyl sale at a suspected drug house at the 900 block of 6th Street West in Bradenton. These were tips that we received, and the 12.3 kilos of fentanyl, including pharmaceutical grade fentanyl used by doctors to treat pain, 1 kilo of cocaine, 1 kilo of ecstasy, 273 grams of meth, 822 grams of marijuana, and 29.4 grams of Adderall. An FN-57 handgun, which is also nicknamed the cop killer, and that ammo's ability to penetrate certain types of soft body armor used by law enforcement. The street value of the fentanyl seized is estimated at $1.4 million, and the total value of all the narcotics seized is valued at $1.7 million.
The Manatee County Sheriff's Office has made a drug bust, enough drugs, fentanyl, to kill everybody in the Tampa Bay metro area. 6 million deadly doses of fentanyl. Now, I know that sounds like a lot of fentanyl, but just hear me out for a second. The average street junkie addicted fentanyl user will use $3,200 worth of fentanyl in a month. That means that what these dealers had was enough to feed roughly 430 junkies. So let's be generous and call it 500 junkies. These guys had enough fentanyl to supply 500 junkies for a whole month. Now don't get me wrong, that's a lot of crackheads, but I calculate that in Manatee County alone, the vagrant and homeless population, or those individuals that are in heavy street use situation, roughly numbers 3,200. And those are street vagrants. That doesn't mean the person that works and has a home and just is having to just use it here or there, or the user that has a normal livelihood. We're talking people who are visibly on the streets, people who are street vagrants, homeless or sheltered. The population of street vagrants in Manatee County is about 3,200. So basically, we're talking about enough fentanyl was taken off the streets, a seventh of the supply for the vagrant and street population. The way law enforcement makes these press conferences, you would think that they have enough fentanyl to supply the Tampa Bay area for weeks. That's not exactly the case. They had enough fentanyl for about 500 junkies for a whole month. Now, the location of this trap house was very strategic, practically in the heart of Bradenton with arteries to all the major avenues, which means the effect of this bust will be felt throughout the entire of the city of Bradenton. And already, if you're driving around town, you'll notice less vagrants in this area. In fact, the core of the homeless population has now shifted away from Bradenton into another area of the metropolitan area. We're not going to discuss what that is on today's video, but if you drive around town, you know where the focal points are, and you know that there was recently a shift from Bradenton to another area. That shift happened before this drug bust, so there's something else in the environment as well right now. If you've been watching my Hood series on Bradenton, you know that the streets in this town are absolutely plagued. But now that we have a realistic understanding of how much drug these people actually have, we can understand the real impact on the streets. Practically almost insufficient. It's enough to move around junkies from one point to the next, but it isn't enough to really make a difference in the county. 2 years ago, overdose deaths plateaued. Over the last year, overdose deaths have been declining. And it isn't because all of a sudden the law enforcement agencies are doing a great job. In fact, they've done a pathetic job because of how bad the overdose crisis got. In fact, anybody who's been around junkies and homeless people understands that it's actually really not that hard to crack these cycles of drugs and who's behind it all. It isn't that difficult. Junkies are, after all, people that will do anything for $100, so it doesn't take much to figure out that if law enforcement really wanted to catch these people that are behind these networks, it isn't that difficult. If you live in a drug-plagued city like Bradenton or Philadelphia, you understand more than well how insufficient law enforcement is at doing anything about drug trafficking. Apart from the fact that this bust is actually pretty insignificant, when you look at Bradenton, Florida, fentanyl is no longer the most dangerous drug that's out there. As of now, among the youth is a new wave of THC vapes and synthetic THC vapes that is spreading like wildfire. These THC vapes and the synthetics are coming from the northern region of the country, many times brought over here by people who snowbird. From states like Michigan and Minnesota. Spice, K2, Tunchi are just some of the new drugs that are out there that are now the go-to drug for people on the streets. The new homeless regulations in the state of Florida changed people from using fentanyl, which makes people sleepy and drowsy, to using meth, which keeps people awake for days. As you guys know, we had all these new homeless regulations that came into effect in the state of Florida. These homeless regulations changed the lifestyle of the homeless indefinitely. Today, what exists on the streets is a mixture, a cocktail, many times called pink cocaine or Tunsi or Tucci. Whatever this mixture is, this is the new go-to drug, and it has just basically a mixture of all these different drugs together, and that is the new go-to drug. It has a little bit of fentanyl in there, but these variations are all different. None of them are the same, and this is what's on the streets right now. The shift from fentanyl to meth among the homeless population has been because of the new homeless laws in Florida. And while meth isn't as deadly as fentanyl, it sure as crap isn't an improvement of a lifestyle. Many homeless people in Manatee County area are telling me that when they get drug tested and they believe they're addicted to fentanyl, when they look at the results, there's actually no fentanyl in their system. In other words, in Manatee County, Florida, there's a new concoction on the streets of whatever the crap it is that is being sold to people that are vagrant and homeless as if it were fentanyl, but it really isn't fentanyl. Now, they said that this was medical grade fentanyl, so this was the real deal. Now, the Manatee County Sheriff's Office said that this fentanyl came from California, and it might have. However, you have to keep in mind that the overdose death rate in Florida is 1.4 times higher than California. So why would a state that has less overdoses be supplying a state that has more? That's a good question mark to me. If you were to look at a map of overdoses, you would see that Eastern Kentucky, West Virginia, Eastern Tennessee, Western North Carolina, this area is the epicenter of overdoses in the United States. When medical examiners in the state of Kentucky do forensic laboratory work on people who die from overdoses, they are discovering not just fentanyl, but many times the precursors to fentanyl individually sampled in people who overdose in the state of Kentucky, which means that the precursors to make fentanyl exist in eastern Kentucky. Now, you have the city of Louisville and Memphis in that area. Both are large airport hubs. Louisville, Kentucky has an overdose death rate of 70 per 100,000. Nashville, Tennessee has an overdose death rate of 100 per 100,000. And Philadelphia, 70 per 100,000. There's a lot of things in common between these cities that have the most overdoses. Philadelphia being near ports, Louisville and Nashville being near large airports. Now, a new fentanyl epicenter has arisen in the state of Louisiana. New Orleans has ports. This is the way that overdose death rates actually work. It's always been cities like Baltimore, San Francisco, Philadelphia, New Orleans, port cities that happen to have the most overdoses. Where law enforcement comes up with the theory that this is coming from the border and from Mexico and California when the precursors are being found in eastern Kentucky is beyond logic. Blaming the state of California for being the source of these drugs, when in reality, Florida, Louisiana, Kentucky, West Virginia, all states over here are the states that have the most overdose death rates. The picture that law enforcement agencies paint about how much fentanyl does, how damaging it is, and where it's coming from is very misleading to the public. It's a piece of information that's being manipulated to further their political ideologies. So let's briefly review the facts about this case. It isn't enough fentanyl to kill everybody in the Tampa area. It's enough fentanyl to keep 500 junkies happy for an entire month. You could take 500 junkies 100% off the streets in Bradenton, and most of us wouldn't even notice the difference. The timing of this address is towards the end of the overdose crisis that we're having in the United States. It's already plateaued, it's already fell. Reports from South America is that in Colombia and other parts of South America, coke production has increased dramatically. Already at the Texas border, seizures of cocaine are up significantly. Basically, fentanyl is no longer the main drug going into the United States. Other new forms of synthetic drugs are taking over, and we're seeing THC vapes. Many of them are synthetic. K2, Spice, Tushi, Tunsi, and of course the famous pink cocaine are all the go-to drugs for the homeless population. Fentanyl is being replaced by meth due to the new homeless crackdowns that are happening in Florida and throughout the United States. Fentanyl is no longer a drug that the homeless people are going to because of the new homeless regulations and bans on sleeping outside, enforcement of city ordinances that don't let the homeless people be outside sleeping. Thus, they switched over to meth. This has been a trend in Florida and nationally as of the last few months. Basically, a lot of the information that we're getting about these fentanyl arrests is very misleading information. Even the information that we're getting about the sources of fentanyl are very misleading, considering that the precursors already exist in the United States and the epicenters of overdoses are not anywhere near the West Coast. Much of what we're hearing from law enforcement agencies is nothing more than their personal political rhetoric and less accurate than reality. Regardless, the pervasiveness of fentanyl on the streets of Bradenton, Florida has declined dramatically, and overdose death rates in the United States are on the decline. New synthetics, drug mixtures, and analogs of fentanyl are what's moving more right now in the area. Very little information is available about the long-term health effects of drugs like K2 that people are reporting are leaving people with long-term health conditions. And these are becoming more popular among the homeless and those who are chronic users. The situation in Florida is not improving when it comes to addiction. Sure, the overdose deaths are down because fentanyl and those deadly mixtures are no longer the go-to drug for people who are on the streets. However, the drugs that they are using and the new mixtures that are out there do have long-term health effects. Fentanyl creates overdoses, which kills people. These new drug mixtures create long-term health complications. The chronically homeless population, people who've been homeless for decades, are telling me that recently the homeless population is more propense to certain types of health complications, including cancer. They believe that the new drug mixtures that are out there have the propensity to leave you with cancer within a very short time of consumption. Nobody knows exactly what these chemical mixtures are, including law enforcement. If we're going to be real, what's killing people when it comes to drug addiction today is no longer overdoses. It's car accidents, it's hit and runs, it's vehicle versus pedestrians, it's cancer, it's medical complications, it's infections. Those are the things that are killing the homeless and the addicted today. Overdoses are no longer what's killing people, but that doesn't mean that drugs aren't killing people more than ever. We're seeing more people get hit by vehicles, car accidents, and dying from drug-related complications from one form or the other more than overdoses. People are dying from drugs more than ever. The ways that they're dying is no longer overdoses. Their infections, their cancers, their amputations, their medical complications, or behavioral symptoms that indirectly cost the deaths of these individuals and of other people. Do not be misled. Drugs are killing more people than ever right now, but it's no longer via overdoses. The medical examiner's offices are many times being pressured by law enforcement agencies to categorize every single death that happens from an overdose as fentanyl. In other words, already many of the deaths that we are considering were fentanyl deaths were actually a drug mixture death that the medical examiners have been forced to label as fentanyl deaths by law enforcement agencies or their superiors, who are being pressured to label all drug overdose deaths as fentanyl. Just because somebody has fentanyl in their system doesn't exactly mean that that is the reason why they died. How dangerous fentanyl is has been misbranded and miscategorized by government agencies for a very long time now, for various reasons. For one, it furthers their political agendas. 2. Law enforcement agencies and medical examiner offices cannot determine, categorize, or even identify exactly which mixtures of drugs are the ones that are the most deadly. Thus, because they're not able to keep up and categorize these deaths accordingly, they've been pressured to just slap everything that has fentanyl in it as a fentanyl death. Throughout the United States, the results of medical examiner offices vary greatly. Each county or district has their own medical examiners. Take Lee County, Florida. Despite Fort Myers and Bradenton being identical in their demographic, their geography, and their consumption habits, if you look at the results from the medical examiner's offices, the causes of death from different substances vary greatly. That is because in that district, they have a different medical examiner's office, and whatever they're doing over there is independent from what's happening over here. In other words, the results from each medical examiner's office is going to vary differently because they're all in different districts managed by completely different people, and their results are never the same, suggesting that there's no concordance among professionals about exactly what is causing these deaths. When we see these press conferences from law enforcement agencies in Florida, they always blame California. They need to stop doing that. We know analytically that in Florida, we have a significantly higher overdose death rate. Instead of pointing a finger at California, figure out exactly what the crap is happening in your streets. When it comes to Bradenton, Florida, sure, there's waves. Like an accordion, there's times where it shrinks and other times it grows. Times when there's more overdoses and times when there's less. The situation on the streets of Bradenton, Florida is as dire and desperate as it's ever been. And just because we're seeing a reduction in overdose deaths doesn't mean that drug addiction, drug dealing, and the marketing and trafficking of illegal substances is on the decline in this area. Regarding the specific area of Bradenton where this drug bust was made, you can't even Uber drive in this part of Bradenton. 1 in 3 people is moving illegal substances. The amount of trafficking hand to hand in illegal activities that happen here in this part of Bradenton makes it to where it isn't even safe to Uber drive in this part of town. Like I said, about 1 in 3 passengers that you pick up in this part of Bradenton are literally openly transporting drugs or doing some type of drug-related activity. That should just give you an idea how much drug trafficking is taking place out of Bradenton, Florida. In Sarasota, while driving in that city, about 1 in 30 passengers is of that nature. Despite those differences, the overdose death rates between Sarasota and Bradenton are fairly on par with each other, and that is because the substances are different. In Sarasota, the substances are odorless, and the methods of trafficking are a little bit more covert, more discreet. In Bradenton, drug dealing is done openly, and it's very obvious to tell when somebody is engaging in illegal activity. For example, individuals who are going from one residential neighborhood to the next late at night, on the phone communicating, it isn't hard to tell. These are individuals who are clearly engaging in criminal activity, and like I said, the streets of Bradenton at night are so dangerous that if you were to pick up 10 passengers for Uber in one night, at least 3 of them would visibly be engaging in illegal activity. While it would be beautiful to see the day that Bradenton isn't a drug-ridden craphole, the reality of this arrest is that it will have minimal effects on the future. In fact, already there have been readjustments among the vagrant population that reflect that the sources are somewhere else. Most of these homeless people who are disabled have to be within a certain distance of their dealers. These individuals congregate in certain areas because their dealers are there. When you see them uproot from one neighborhood to the next, it's because they no longer have a source. That's why many areas have a lot of homeless people and other areas have practically none. Do you guys think it's hard for law enforcement to find out where a trap house is? All you have to do is hand a $20 bill to a homeless person and fly a drone over their head. They're going to go straight to the spot where they get their stuff from. It isn't hard to unravel these networks. The issue isn't how hard it could be to unravel these networks. The issue is that law enforcement is completely uninterested in stopping these businesses. And when they do make an arrest, they over-exaggerate the impact that it's going to have on the community, and they try to throw in some type of political ideology into the mix to deceive people about the reality of the drug problem in their community. If you live in Bradenton, Florida, you know what it's about. You know that this isn't going to change overnight. And yeah, sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more. But overall, the situation here always results in the same situation. My message to the youth of Bradenton, Florida: instead of giving stuff to the homeless people that can hurt them, give them something that can help them, like food or just a smile. Instead of taking advantage of these people, find a way to create economical opportunities that they can benefit from. For example, about a year ago, I was interviewing homeless people. I was able to get their stories. For many of them, being able to share their stories about being on the streets was something like therapy for them, an opportunity to give a voice to somebody that's unheard. Today, with social media, platforms like YouTube, it isn't hard for you to be an artist, a creator, or anything else you want to do. If you have a cell phone in your hand, you have the ability to create income legitimately. Most of the time, when you get involved in the drugs, it only leads you in one place, and that is prison. Well, I don't know what's going to happen to these individuals that are being charged with drug trafficking. I do know this, that there's a lot of people who are going to see the sunshine today, who are going to be able to decide where they're going to eat, be able to decide if they want to go to the beach. You're not going to be locked up in a cage. When I see these young kids here in Bradenton making these little trips on Uber to make $20 or $40 on a drug sale, I can only think that for $20 or $40, somebody could hurt you. You're so young, you have so much potential. The streets don't lead to anything. Many times when people get out of prison, they don't have homies to go back to. They have to go back to the streets and live on a sidewalk. Because 10, 15 years from now, when you finally get out of prison, you may not have a place to go back to. All your friends have forgotten you, have moved on, have lived their lives, and you're going to walk out of a prison and go sleep on the sidewalk the next night, having nowhere to go. The streets lead to nothing. There are so many ways for you to live a productive life that don't include the streets. On top of that, here in Southwest Florida, snitching is at an all-time level. The people that you think are your users or your suppliers will flip on you in a second to get out of a bid. Snitching is no longer frowned upon on the streets of Florida. It's a common practice, and the people that you deal with are going to be the same ones who are going to turn you in. There's no loyalty, no love, no profit, nothing on the streets that's worthwhile. When you are a YouTube creator or an independent artist, the sky is the limit. I'm not going to tell you that I'm rich. I got an Uber drive to pay the bills sometimes, but I live in Lakewood Ranch. I got nice vehicles. I got a nice place to live, and me and my family never go hungry. And no disrespect intended to anybody locked up right now, but the reality is that tonight I'm going to be going to sleep with a white woman, and these dudes are going to have to go to sleep with 500 other guys who probably haven't even washed their feet yet. If you choose the streets, the reward is very little. If you have the opportunity to have a talent or an ability, be a YouTuber or a music creator, whatever talent you have, find it, be it, believe in yourself. Because at the end of the day, there's nothing on these streets. There's no loyalty, there's no love, and there's no profit. The only thing you're going to find on these streets is death or jail. But the worst part about drug dealing is the fact that you're taking advantage of a human being who's already in a miserable condition, and instead of helping them improve their situation, you're contributing to that person's life being ruined. Whether directly or indirectly, when you traffic drugs, you bring your own human race to destruction.